Hello and welcome, beautiful, amazing soul family. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to be talking about 3 ways that we can self-regulate, self-soothe to bring our nervous system back into balance. I know, most of us in this world are experiencing a kind of hyper-vigilant state of anxiety. If it's not acutely activated, then most of us are experiencing it on some kind of low-level consistent basis. It's always simmering in the background, this kind of slight sense that I'm not quite safe. So before I jump into that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all your comments. It's so beautiful to see you sharing and being open about your experience. And I also want to honor you, because if you're here, you're taking the steps towards self-awareness, self-discovery, and spiritual expansion. And that's what this world needs. And it can be challenging and it can take courage. And I just want to honor you for being in that. So to get into today, or today, actually, I also wanted to say thank you to a beautiful subscriber who actually suggested this topic today. And thank you for her comments as well. So before we get into regulating the nervous system and tools that we can use, it really helps if we can actually understand a little bit about what goes on. And I think that's one of the reasons that anxiety is sort of like this epidemic at the moment, is because we're not really taught how, like what it is, where it comes from, and then how to deal with it. And so if we're experiencing these out of control emotive reactions in our body, it can be really scary because there's no understanding. It's like the boogeyman. So the nervous system, now I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a biologist, so I speak from study in the field of spirituality and my own learned experience, my own regulating my own system and deep spiritual exploration. But the nervous system is nothing original. So when you feel it go off, when you feel yourself have, say, a bout of anxiety, it's not because something new has come into your field. It's because something in your field has reminded you of a past situation. And in that past situation, it's been something where the subconscious mind and the physical reaction has been such that it's triggered you into a fight, flight, freeze response, for example. So it's all based on the interpretation of our past experiences. So if we've had past experiences where we felt threatened, and a lot of this occurs before the age of 7. So what might scare a 7-year-old, or what might emotionally affect a 7-year-old who has no kind of perspective or rational capacity to understand, why they might be feeling a certain way. If we have received that imprint and then we go about spending the rest of our lives reacting to that story, from a subconscious, unseen place, then it can be really debilitating, really, disempowering. And so that's one of the first things, is that our nervous system responses are learned, and they're usually learned when we're really young, when we don't have the adult capacity for rational understanding of things. Now, obviously, also when we're young, there are big trauma events, not just little trauma events. But these function in the same way. They affect and they imprint our nervous system in the same way. It's just that we might need a different approach when it comes to unraveling them. And it might be, it's just a different approach when we're unraveling them. So the nervous system and the subconscious, as I mentioned, are absolutely intertwined. If you consider that our body and our function is simply a 3-dimensional printout of our underlying thoughts, feelings, emotions, and subconscious imprints. So those programs which were written into our personality and formed our personality throughout our formative years. So in understanding this sort of stuff, you can actually take back your power. it defuses some of the panic, some of the need to panic, and some of the need to suppress and avoid. And so in getting into these tools, what I'm going to talk about today, the 3 points, they're tools to help you self-regulate when you're in a particularly triggered state. So just to kind of bring the heart rate back, bring yourself back to resource yourself back into capacity, because we can't heal anything when we're in an activated state. We need to actually be in our nervous system and our body and our mind need to feel like we're in a state of safety before we can start to come to any resolution. So the first thing we do is resource our immediate reaction. So one of the first things that you can do with this is deep conscious breathing. Now, I know this might sound a little bit simple, but when we take deep conscious breaths into our diaphragm, it actually has a physiological effect on our nervous system. So we've got the sympathetic, the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic is when we drop into fight, flight, and the parasympathetic is that rest and digest. And so when we take these deep breaths, we start to self-soothe. We start to soothe the release of stress chemicals, and the parasympathetic nervous system starts to come online. Now, in doing this, it's the process I suggest is really focusing on the breath. So following it, being conscious, noticing the experience in the body, taking the deep breaths, being in a space where you can take the breaths, be still, be centered. And one actually addition to this, and this is a technique I teach more deeply in the 6-month container, where the one-on-one support that I hold people through. And there are 2 energetic points. And how we quite naturally, if we're, if we're stressed out, we might quite naturally place our hands over our forehead. There are actually 2 acupressure points. And so it can actually amp up. So if you're self-soothing through this breath, and you just add these, your 2 fingers and your thumb to these frontal eminences in the forehead, and just allow yourself to be present and to self-soothe. Now, I understand that in highly activated states, this may be very difficult, but I do encourage you to try it, and to be open to drawing your attention back to the present moment, out from whatever you're projecting. And, I've seen people, they get really agitated, really anxious and stressed out because of a fictional event happening, at some unspecified point in the future. And I think it was Mark Twain who actually said the phrase that I've known a great many troubles in my life, most of which never happened. And that really, it encapsulates the word catastrophize, is when we get caught in our mind and we're creating a scenario that's enough to send us into panic simply through our projected thoughts. And I know anxiety is deep and nuanced. Trust me, I understand this. But for the purpose of this video, I do hope this can be of service. So that's the breathing, and this is a technique called emotional stress release, which, again, as I said, that we can go much deeper with, but I teach more of that in the program. So the second point, and this is really probably it takes a bit of courage, but it's also one of the most empowering responses we can have when we're feeling activated in our nervous system, is to feel it. So our habit and what we kind of learn to do, we have an aversion to discomfort, and we have an aversion to stress or our activated nervous system response. And so what we'll try and do, we'll generally try and think around it. We'll try and think, oh, I shouldn't be worried because it's only this, this, and this. Or we will think ourselves into it. That's another thing, of course. But we'll also do anything that we can to distract ourselves and take ourselves away from the sensation in the body. So anxiety, we tend to think of as something that happens in our head. The nervous system response happens in the body, and so there are sensations with that. And so when we stop trying to avoid the sensations or distract ourselves from those sensations in the body, we're actually helping ourselves to drop out of the head. So the head agitates the situation because our nervous system is responding to a perceived threat, something that we're perceiving. But when we drop into our body and actually feel the sensations, notice in the torso, maybe there's butterflies, maybe there's tightness, maybe you need to move a little bit, but I'll get into that in a minute. But the capacity to sit and feel something. And I had an experience, if I can tell this story, when I started doing this work, and I may have shared this on another video, but it was just such a profound moment for me. When I had, I used to have social anxiety. I'd, come away from seeing people and I'd have a lot of self-doubt and fear. And my system would feel quite activated, worrying about what I'd done wrong, blah, 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 blah. All the usual things that might, those simmering fears that keep us limited. And as I was driving away, I could feel it in my, I knew to drop into my body instead of just having the brain fuzz. So stopped with the thought, and I went into the body and I just felt it, and I didn't resist it. I didn't rationalize it. I didn't justify it. I didn't talk myself out of it. And I just felt it, and I just gently breathed for a little while. I consciously breathed, not trying to get rid of it, because that's a trap. We'll generally do these steps to try and expel it, to get rid of it. But it's the acceptance of it and the presence to it that actually, and so I was in the car and I was driving and I was actually stopped at some traffic lights so I could sort of drop into it more deeply. And despite the discomfort, and it didn't take very long at all, it was just a kind of like less than a minute probably of really being in it. And it sort of dissipated. It just dissolved. Now I know this wasn't a deep chronic acute or a deep acute attack. It was very uncomfortable and I was very activated. But I understand that, we all experience things from at different layers. But this was profound. And I encourage you to be open to possibly trying it, to just, even if you're alone and you're reflecting on something that's happened and you have this kind of this low level sense of doom, even allow yourself to feel it and to take this one step further. So use it. So feeling into the body, allowing yourself to be there, and then perhaps resourcing. So you might find a posture which is particularly nurturing. Often if we wrap ourselves in a blanket, just that very act helps to soothe the nervous system. And as you're noticing it in the body, continue with the breathing. And perhaps there's an affirmation, something like, I'm safe. I don't need to change this. There's nothing for me to do about this now. Everything's going to work out. Noticing in the body, just one of, a comment that will help to de-escalate the experience and the activation that's going on. And so, as I said, all of these reactions are coming back to a learned reaction. The human body is just an amazing vessel which repeats its patterns until we learn to unravel them, until we bring them to awareness and move beyond them. And so this is a way of bringing us out of the reaction. And when we self-regulate, we can start to look at what's beneath. But I'll mention that in a minute. So one of my favorites is just simply to say, I'm safe. Be here now. Notice the experience. Also noticing the sensation of perhaps the body. Noticing yourself with your feet on the floor. All of these things that bring our sensory awareness back into the now and experiencing the sensation, not the perception. So I hope this is landing. I'd love to hear if you, if this is helpful or supportive, or if you have any experience of this. So the third point, and I've kind of already mentioned the self-touch and the posture, so I'm going to say something different actually. So sometimes with our nervous system, they don't call it fight flight for no reason. So if we're fully activated, that means there's a generation of body chemistry, which actually is the body's preparation to have a fight or run away, or in my case, often freeze. But in experiencing that activation in the system, maybe you just need to move. Maybe you need to shake it out. Maybe you need to go for a walk and ground in nature. So tuning in and seeing what action the body needs. And, there are times when, I'll move the upper body, and that just kind of helps to dispel the energy. And you can almost do it. So bringing the energy work into it a little bit, you can almost do it as if you're visualizing, shaking off the stress, shaking off that, that escalated sense of danger, that fear or the anxiety. And when you do that, and you kind of have this mental image of yourself becoming free, becoming safe, becoming centered. So there's movement, and sometimes it'll be the lower limbs that you really feel like moving. So you might just want to jump on the spot for a little bit, move the spine, move the shoulders. And that can just be another good way to help regulate the energy. And what you might want to do after doing that, if that feels right for you, is come back and then find that what's the havening is the practice of, self-soothing through touch. That's kind of like a reassuring presence. So take a deep breath now. And so that's just a little peek, and it's any combination of these, but definitely the deep breathing, just to help bring you back into your body, noticing your feet planted on the floor, being in the body, not running away from the experience and not running into the mind. Because when we run into the mind, we escalate. And we can drop back into the body, we create a space for grace and movement, and that energy can start to, we can develop a resilience. So we develop a capacity to be with it, which we've probably not done before. But it also energetically, when we stop resisting, it can move through. So once we start to de-escalate, we can begin to explore the core triggers, because as I said, the trigger isn't the thing that happened outside. The trigger is the imprint from a past experience where you felt threatened, unsafe. I mean, I should actually qualify that. Yes, there may be some genuinely unsafe situations that you find yourself in. And again, but again, it's this sort of capacity to regulate once we find ourselves in safety. But most of our anxiety comes from a trigger which, is an overreaction. We can feel anxious sitting in our lounge room at home. So once we have de-escalated that, we can start to resource ourselves, and we can start to explore that. And so as a suggestion, just, from this little video, you can journal on this, and you can start to ask yourself the questions in reflection upon the trigger or the activation. What is it that you're afraid of? What was the fear that was showing up? Was it rational? Was it irrational? Why? What lies beneath that? And if it's something like, how dare this person speak to me this way? I invite you to go deeper, because somebody speaking to us in a certain way is not, it's immensely triggering and it can be abusive. But when we come to a point of finding our inner strength and resourcefulness, it's kind of like, well, what is the underlying fear, and where does that stem from? Because it's probably not the first time you've experienced it. And so just starting that self-inquiry. Yeah, so when does that experience remind me of? When have I felt that in the past? And when we start to backtrack, we can start to see the patterns that show up. So the other final point I want to make, which is kind of like a little fourth point, is to find yourself with safe people and safe spaces. You know, if you're constantly activated around certain people, then perhaps those people shouldn't necessarily be in your life. And you know, I know any one of these points could open a much deeper conversation, but at the end of the day, we need to manage our, who has access to our energy. So I do hope that this has served. If it has resonated, please let me know. Please hit the like, comment, subscribe. And if you subscribe, hit the little bell button so that you get notified when I do release new stuff. So thank you so much for being here. Check in the comments there's a free meditation and just a few links. And if you're interested in exploring this work more deeply, I would welcome you into my private 6-month container, where we really go deep and where I hold energy activations, but also a guided process for balancing these ascension energies into your body. So my loves, thank you again, and I wish you a beautiful day.